Hello people of YouTube, slightly different sort of setup today than normal, but it is for a good cause because today I'm going to be showing you how I animate stuff with Adobe Illustrator and Adobe After Effects. A few days ago my sister Renee asked me if I could send her a little screencast, sort of tutorial kind of thing, showing her how I animate my things, and I was like, that is quite a good idea for a video as a whole. So instead of just making a small screen recording for her, I'm gonna do a slightly larger tutorial showing the whole thing. Okay, let's dive right into Adobe Illustrator first. Right, so I have opened Adobe Illustrator. I am using Adobe CC 2017, so at the point I'm recording this, it's the very latest version of Adobe Illustrator. This tutorial kind of assumes that you are already quite familiar with Adobe Illustrator, but less so with Adobe After Effects, because it's more about the animating part than about the making the figure you will be animating part. So in this tutorial, we are going to be making a very simple sort of waving stick figure. That's my idea, just so I can blaze through the Illustrator section a little bit fast and then be a little bit more elaborate on the Adobe After Effects section. So I have already opened Adobe Illustrator. You can see some projects and stuff I've been working on recently. If I click Create New, I should already have a preset open. This is the wrong way around. This is oriented English. This is, yeah, there we go, oriented horizontally. This preset just assumes that I'm going to be animating for a 1080p sequence. If you're interested, these are the complete settings of the thing. Let's call this Stickman tutorial. Create document, and we're in. Very nice. Now that can go away for the time being. Okay, so like I said, this assumes that you already know a little bit about Illustrator. So I'm just gonna quickly make a sort of stickman shape. And after I'm done with that, I will continue with how to animate the thing. Something like that. I guess that's a stick figure type of thing. What I'm gonna do now is make all of these lines, because I drew this in lines, into shapes. There we go, outline stroke. And then what's very important, and this is the first actual sort of step in this tutorial, after you've, well, you should actually do this sort of before you start drawing. You should start thinking about what parts of your illustration you want to have animated. So in this case, all we're going to do is animate his arm, so he does a bit of this sort of movement. All of the parts that need to be animated need to be in a separate layer in Illustrator already. So that's what we're gonna do right now. I'm gonna make two new layers, one for his upper arm and one for his lower arm. And we're just gonna select that so I can see in the layers which one that is. Drag that one up to layer 2, and then which one is that? That one is this shape. Drag that up there. So now we have separate layers for his body and the rest of his arm, basically. We have a layer for his upper arm, and we have a layer for his lower arm. Now, just for the sake of knowing what the hell is going on in After Effects later on, I'm going to name these layers. So I'm going to call this one, how does this work again? It's always a sign of confidence when you are watching a tutorial and the tutorial list asks, how the hell does this work? So now we have our very basic stick figure. Let's save this. Yes, I did indeed call this folder how to animate. Stickman tutorial file name. I think that's a decent file name. So let's save it. Basic Illustrator settings are fine, I think. So save that. Let's shut down Illustrator, clear clipboard. That is perfectly fine. And then we are going to start up Adobe After Effects. While that's starting up, very important. Okay, so After Effects has started up. I'm just going to click New Project, which makes that first dialog screen disappear and just opens After Effects. And I'm going to import my Illustrator project by double-clicking in the project panel, which that opens up this import dialog screen, and I'm going to click on Video, Project, How to Animate, and then Stickman Tutorial, the Illustrator file we have made before. Now, this is very important. You go to this drop-down menu, which says Import As, and then you can select Composition or Composition Retain Layer Sizes. I'm just going to go for Retain Layer Sizes. That's going to sort of keep everything into the 1080p aspect ratio size thing that I made my Illustrator file in as well. So that has, as you can see, imported all of the separate layers in this Stickman tutorial. Let's make that a little bit bigger. Stickman tutorial layers folder. So you have the body, the lower arm, and the upper arm. And then it's also made a sequence for you. Now, if you double click that sequence, you get this, which is a little bit useless because the background is the same color as the Stickman. So to fix that for the time being, we are gonna right click on our sequence. I'm calling it a sequence. It's not called a sequence, it's a composition. So we right click on our composition, then we click composition settings, set the background color to white, because that is very nice and easy to do. And then what you also want to do is, if you are gonna mix this animation with another video, I always set my frame rate of my composition to the same frame rate as my video footage is. So right now I am recording video footage and I'm recording this screencast at 29.97, so almost 30 frames per second. And that is just so that everything matches and your editing software doesn't start doing weird things with overlapping frames and that sort of thing. A duration of 8 seconds for this little waving animation is more than enough, I think. So we click OK, and that has applied everything we just said to this composition. So we have our little stickman here. We have his 3 separate bits. His body is pretty much going to stay where it is, but we are going to give the upper arm and the lower arm some movement. And to start giving him some movement, I'm first going to zoom in a little bit, press H to get the hand tool so you can drag your composition around. This doesn't actually move any items in the composition, it just moves the whole composition. H, hand. And then we're gonna press Y to adjust the location of the anchor point. And this is first the anchor point of the lower arm, which needs to be at the joint of where you want to move the lower arm, basically. And then we go to the upper arm, and we do the same thing, but we move it to the shoulder. Now, the stick figure doesn't have actual shoulders, but for the sake of this tutorial, we're going to call his little stick body his shoulder. So we have his 2 joints joined up by the anchor point right there. And what we're going to do next is parent the layers to each other, which basically means that you actually connect the movement of one layer to the movement of another layer. So the upper arm, in this case, needs to be connected to the movement of the body. So what I'm going to do is click this. This is called a pick whip, I think. Don't quote me on that. And I'm going to click and drag it to the body layer. And I'm going to do the same thing for the lower arm, but I'm going to pick whip that and put it on the upper arm. So now all of the movement is connected. So what happens now is, if we select the body layer and we press P for position and we start moving this around, everything is still connected. Now, if everything wasn't connected, say that is not connected, that is not connected, then the little arms stay in their own place while the body is moving upside down, and this just looks really strange. So we are gonna undo that. Control Z is undoing it and connecting everything back up, which means that if we now move it around, the whole stick figure moves around. We're gonna put this nicely in the middle of the composition. There we go. What we're now gonna do for the little wave motion that's gonna happen is we're gonna select these. I already did it there because I'm thinking in advance, but we selected these and I pressed R for rotation, because basically a simple rotating movement is all that is needed for a wave. Now, as you can start seeing, when I start moving the upper arm, the lower arm starts rotating with him as well. Now, this by itself does not make a waving animation. This just looks a bit limpy, a little bit weird. So what I'm going to do is set this back at 0 degrees and start keyframing the thing. Keyframing basically means that with every point you put on the timeline, you set a certain value for, in this case, the rotation. So for this keyframe, I'm going to click the stopwatch. The rotation point is 0, and I'm going to move forward to about 15 frames, and then I'm going to drag this, not that way, this way, drag this downwards because the rotation is going backwards to say minus 70 or something along those lines. And then if I hit play, you can see his little arm going up there all by itself without me actually touching the mouse. So by making keyframes, he does his own movements, if you will. So now we have put that one in that position, which means that if we now turn his arm around and start doing this, it's pretty much a wave, I'd say. So that's gone up. I'm gonna go slightly back towards like 8-ish frames and start making keyframes for the lower arm as well. So we click the stopwatch again, and then we go forward on the timeline a little bit, and then we also start doing the lower arm's rotation. And as you can see right there, that is definitely a sort of waving motion. So what we can do now is put it there in a sort of starting position, then move, let's say 4 or 5-ish frames forward, and then put it there, and then copy this keyframe, which is the starting position again, move a few frames forward, and then copy those two, move another few frames forward, and then as we go all the way back, that is definitely very janky, admittedly, sort of waving motion. What we can now do is refine this a little bit. So what I always like to do is selecting all of my keyframes, pressing F9, which gives them a smooth sort of motion. Still a bit janky, but it looks a little bit more like he accelerates and then stops, accelerates and then stops, instead of just very harsh motion, if you will. So we're gonna keep copying that for a little bit. A few frames forward, another few frames forward. That definitely looks like a bit of a wave. And then to end it off again, we can go a few frames forward. We select these from the upper arm, copy them with Ctrl-C, and then paste them again with Ctrl-V. And then we go to time reverse keyframes, which obviously inverses the keyframe. So that means that his lower arm, or his upper arm, is going to go back to its original position. And that is almost a waving motion. The only very last thing that needs to happen is that his lower arm goes back to its original position as well, which I've done by copying the first keyframe and pasting it as the last keyframe. So that is definitely a bit of a waving motion, I'd say. And then to top it off, the very last thing that I would suggest you do is turn on motion blur, which I am slightly too big a fan of. You do that by going there, you have the 3 little circles, that is the icon for motion blur, and you select motion blur for each layer. Now the body one doesn't necessarily need it because it's not really moving around, but might as well. And then you turn on motion blur for the whole composition. So click motion blur, and that's gonna give it a nice sort of natural looking blur to it, so the motion looks completely smooth. And I think if we crop down the timeline a little bit and trim comp to work area, we go back to the beginning and we press play, I think that is a very smooth little waving motion. It looks a bit silly as a little stickman, but I quite like that. I like that a lot. Now, of course, you can do this with all sorts of different motion as well. So if you want to have him jumping up and down while waving, you can press, you can select the body, press P for position, and start keyframing that as well. Now, jumping motions are a bit difficult because they start from a very hard point of acceleration, basically, and then slow off and then fall down again quite hard. So what you do is you set a non-smooth keyframe, then you go forward a few frames, you drag your little stickman up, you go forward again a few frames, and you copy and paste the first keyframe. Then you select the middle keyframe, press F9 to smooth it out. That's definitely a bit of a jump. Now, of course, if you had put the legs in separate layers as well, you could have also animated the legs, so he actually did a jumping motion that is complete with leg movement, but for now this suffices, I would say. So if we want him to do a few more jumps, we select all of the keyframes, go a little bit forward, give him another jump, go a bit further forward, give him another jump. And I think that looks pretty good, I'd say. That is definitely a jumping, waving stickman right there. And that is pretty much how I do animating with Adobe Illustrator and Adobe After Effects. Now, of course, you can make the illustrations and animations as complex as you want them to be. This is a very, very basic example. So when you are done animating, you are going to have to export your animation to either use it separately as a video file or to take it into your favorite video editor and mix it with camera footage and audio, that sort of thing. So what you do is when you're in your composition, you press Ctrl M, which brings up the render queue, and then you have your queued composition here. Now, I have a few presets that are applied automatically, but if you just start using Adobe After Effects, then this is probably going to say best settings like it does with mine, and then below that it's going to say something else. Now if you click on that, you get to select the format and the format options that you want to export with. So what I personally recommend and what I always do when I want to export an animation that doesn't necessarily need a transparent background, that is a thing you can do. You select the format QuickTime and then RGB. And then in format options, I usually select 95, which gives you a slightly smaller file size than you would get with 100, but doesn't compromise on quality that much. And then you select the audio output if you have any audio. I just leave it on auto, so it automatically selects if I have audio, it's going to export that into the file as well. If I don't have audio at all, it's gonna deliver a video file without any audio track, which is quite handy dandy. And if you have all of this set to whatever kind of settings you require, you press OK, and then you're gonna select your name and your file location right there in output 2, and then when you're done, you're gonna click render. That's gonna walk through the whole animation, including the motion blur and all of the movements you have put in. And when that's done, you're going to hear a little bit of a plunk sound as a heads up saying like, wayo, Mr. Animator or Mrs. Animator, I am done rendering and you can now use me in whatever project you would like. And I think that is pretty much it for this tutorial. So I hope I taught you something if this is something that you wanted to learn. If you have any questions whatsoever left, then leave them down in the comments below or tweet me at Tom Ensing and I will answer your questions as good as I can. Thank you very much for watching for now, and I will see you next time. Ciao!